Ed. My name is Jennifer Barron-Prawl, and on behalf of the South Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, I'm so pleased to be hosting today's webinar, which is titled Improve Vocational Outcomes Among Adolescent and Young Adults in Coordinated Specialty Care. Integrate evidence-based engagement and support strategies. This is going to be an awesome webinar. We're really happy to have Vanessa Klodnick, Sean Spencer, and Laura Stevens as our esteemed speakers, and glad to have you. All right. Know that we are currently in a Zoom webinar platform, and you'll see that on this platform, you will not have to worry about your audio or your video. So those are inactivated, but feel free to please use the chat box in the Q&A. We also have closed captioning as well, so that you can utilize that resource as well while we're talking. Wanted to just make a quick acknowledgement that this presentation was prepared for our MHTTC network, and that's under a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA, so that these are the views of our presenters and not of the Department of Health and Human Services. We here at the MHTTC network use affirming and respectful recovery-oriented language at all times. And we feel like this is particularly important in the work that we do, and we want to convey that in all of our webinars. So we invite you to also join us in reflecting on having that strength-based knowledge, and then be sharing that information too as you have your comments in chat. Also, then we have our code of conduct, and really what we want to say with this is that we're really dedicated to providing events where everyone feels welcome. And while you're here, we can work on this together and be able to achieve a safe and respectful and inclusive environment together. And just be mindful of what you put into the chat. Again, it's important. This is a real quick picture then of the areas that the MHTTC covers. We are from the South Southwest area, which is in this purple spot. So our region covers Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, Louisiana, and our tribal communities. And we really pride ourselves on offering training and events to really bolster our mental health workforce. So again, we're really, really glad that you are here. A couple housekeeping items as we get started. Again, know that we are in a Zoom webinar format. That means, again, you can't share videos or your audio. Feel free to use the chat box to share comments. Be able to be a community that way. We really encourage you to use your Q&A pod for questions. We'll have time at the very end of the webinar to be able to then do those questions as well. So know that as you type those in, if you don't get an immediate answer, we'll have time with our esteemed guests to answer those. Our attendees can earn up to 1 credit of CEUs today, and I'll get those mailed out to you within a few days. So know that that is available for you. We are recording today's session. When that gives a couple of days to get that rendered, and know that that material will also be available to you. And lastly, we have a slide deck that's also available. It's currently uploaded on our website, and you can also watch that as our presenters are showing. Is it working? The chat box working now? Let's see if we're having chat box issues. Hang on. Let's see if it can work. Oh, yay.
Oh, no.
Is it working now?
I like a hot chat.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, you always have to have something goofy technically that happens, so that just like, again, reassures us that we're all human and we can kind of work through these things. So brilliant. Glad that it's working. Glad that you're here. And with that, then, I'm just really happy then to be able to pass them the floor to our presenters today. And it's going to be great. It's going to be a great presentation. So our folks will be introducing themselves to you. So with that, Vanessa, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor.
Fabulous. Thank you. I love a hot chat box. So please introduce yourselves. Please ask questions. Please comment if something that you love. You're like, oh my God, that's so good. Like, and also if you're like, I totally disagree with what they're saying, here's my idea, please throw it in there. Welcome, you guys. Today, I am calling in from Chicago. Do a lot of work in Texas and across the country on partnering with youth and young people and staff in various roles on coordinated specialty care teams to boost vocational engagement and career development. And today we're going to get into how to blend elements of evidence-based practices to really engage and support youth and young adults who are coordinated specialty care participants. I'm so excited to meet y'all. Keep that chat going. I'm actually going to pass this over to Ishan. Hi, Ishan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ishan Spencer. I am currently the Director over Youth Employment for the City of Chicago. But in the past, I've worked with both Vanessa and Laura, presenting to different agencies across at different state level. I have actually had the opportunity to work in different roles when it comes to youth employment. I worked with provided direct services where I was an employment specialist, but also I supervised teams that provided employment services to different populations, including those with mental health challenges, those in foster care, and those that are actually living in the community. And because I've done such a great job, I was fortunate to oversee the IPS employment team for Thresholds. I oversaw 10 employment teams, and 2 of those teams directly provided services to youth and young adults. And I'll turn it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Laura. I am with the University of Texas, and I work on initiatives to improve the continuum of care for young adults with mental health challenges, and currently working on building a first of its kind center in Texas, where we are, snap, as Vanessa would do, you'll see her do that. But we are kind of providing multidisciplinary care to young people on a local community college campus. So I'm really excited to be here. I also have to shout out Randall in the chat. You're from Rosenberg and I grew up in Richmond, and you don't hear about those towns very often in these training formats. So anyway, welcome everybody. Glad to be here.
I love it. I love people bonding over their shared community. Hold on one second while I do some tech stuff and share our slide deck with you. Our goal today is that this webinar becomes a tool for you to share. If you're in an IPS specialist role, supported employment education specialist role, any role on coordinated specialty care, team leader, program manager, executive, we want you to have some tools that can help you improve your program, your practice around engaging youth and young adults and helping them with specifically their employment and education success. So here we go. God, there's so many things on my screen. I can't. No, got it. Sorry. You'd think I've done this 5,000 times and it's still tricky. Okay. So today, we really want to get into what is unique about the transition to adulthood, but specifically as related to career development. This will be really helpful for you to think about your approach of your program, your team, and your practice. We're also going to talk about positive youth development as a philosophy and a set of principles to guide your approach, and IPS supported employment, which also has its own set of principles and practices. And then at the end, we're going to review things that we have learned and grown together, Ishan, Laura, and I, and all the work and consulting we've done nationally of how you can integrate developmentally attuned, really fancy language for being like young person friendly and fun, but also evidence-based service engagement and support strategies into your work today. So you'll leave today being like, I've got something new I can use that's in my bag of practice. Laura and Ishan, you want to add anything else for your, I don't know. No? Okay.
Did great.
Here we go. All right. Passing over to Laura.
All right. So we're going to dive right in. And I see from our chat, thank you for introducing yourselves, that we have really diverse roles and locations and everything in our webinar here today. So I'm going to try to provide information that is useful to everyone. We'll have some kind of tangible takeaway skills and then some kind of high level stuff about young adults and development and all of that. But I want to start by just kind of talking about this transition to adulthood and how we can kind of translate that into vocational engagement and career development. So to start with, now we're kind of using this phrase young adulthood, but when we first started focusing on this population, we called them transition age youth. And whenever you talked about that age group, regardless of who you were talking about it to, somebody is going to ask, well, what does that mean? Like, what is that age range? And it really depends on who you ask. But if you go back a little, so any of my, psychology majors in the house, you may remember Eric Erickson, and he, even if you weren't a psychology major, that's okay, but he essentially defined kind of some developmental tasks across the lifespan. And when we look at his kind of developmental ages, he really pinned young adulthood as this period between like 17 and 25-ish, and then into middle adulthood. And I don't know about y'all, you've all been 25 before, maybe some of you are 25, or maybe you're not quite, but I would not consider 25 to be middle adulthood, maybe back then, but a lot of things have changed since the 50s, maybe, about kind of what young people do and what the expectations of them are. And so we get into the early 2000s, and we have Jeffrey Arnett, who's really kind of one of the biggest voices early on for redefining emerging adulthood and how to meet those needs. And he kind of said, I think that emerging adulthood might go until 30. And for those of you who are into brain development or familiar with it, this might make a little bit of sense, because a lot of times we talk about how brain is not done developing until late 20s, even early 30s for some people. So when we talk about emerging adulthood and young adults, this is really kind of the age that we're talking about, those late teens all the way into late 20s. Okay, so how do you work with the young adults, kind of keeping that stuff in mind about what is this age range, what does it look like? So we really encourage, aside from like the tangible skills that we will talk about later, an entire kind of philosophy shift when you think about young adults. So a lot of times in the mental health space, and especially in the kind of substance use treatment space, we think in terms of recovery. But I would invite you all to kind of quickly think about, like, what does that word recovery mean? And take it outside of kind of the context of mental health, but just think about the word recovery. And so if you break it down, right, recovery evokes getting back something that you've lost, like returning back to some kind of former level of functioning or some former quote unquote good life when things were better. And that just doesn't make a ton of sense for young adults, right? Most 21-year-olds don't want to return to when they were 12, even if things were easier then. They want to move forward. And so we encourage a shift into this idea of discovery and really helping facilitate that process of figuring out who you are and who you want to be and what's important to you. And then kind of along those lines, also shifting from treatment goals to career goals. And this one's hard, especially if you work in a mental health agency, because we can be really deficit focused and really symptom focused. And we talk about, medications and treatment goals and all of these things, but we encourage you to shift into talking more about career goals. And that doesn't mean you don't talk about mental health, but maybe you're talking about mental health in the context of work and in the context of school and in the context of just kind of being a normal young adult. All right. So what exactly is going on? I talked about Eric Erickson a few slides ago, right, and developmental tasks. And so I think it's always helpful to contextualize young adulthood in terms of kind of what is developmentally normal for this age group. It's easy to forget. We all do it, right? But sometimes it helps to kind of like put yourself back to when you were 19, 20, what you were going through. And identity exploration is really kind of the cornerstone of this age group. So they're figuring out, like, who do they want to be? What are their values? What is important to them? Kind of really able to move away from the parental influence and from this kind of identity of their family and into themselves as on their own. And with that is that self-focus piece, which you're all here presumably because some part of you enjoys working with young adults, right? Or is curious about it. But a lot of people don't love this age group, right? Because they can be a little self-involved, but that facilitates that identity exploration process. So it's actually really important. There's also a lot of instability, which can be really uncomfortable for us as helpers, as people who care about them, but again, is really important. Then there's this feeling in between adolescence and adulthood. So they will encounter people, systems, organizations that treat them like they are not capable of making decisions for themselves, like they can't possibly know what they want or what's good for them. And then on the flip side, they'll encounter people and systems that are like, we're not here to handhold you. I'm not going to remind you about your appointments. You need to show up. You're an adult now. You're responsible for this. And how frustrating that can be to feel like neither side is really kind of meeting you where you're at in that moment, and to have to adapt based on whichever person you're talking to or whichever system you are. And that transition happens really fast, right? Like when people treat you like a kid to treating you like adult, there's not really there's not a grace period for figuring it out a lot of times. And then a sense of broad possibilities for the future. There's a lot of kind of future orientation and future thinking, which is really exciting and kind of where we can come in to facilitate a lot of this. I do want to make a note, and that's that sometimes you'll encounter youth who have really complex trauma histories and backgrounds, and they're kind of stuck in this survival mode day to day. And I'm saying that to say that they won't always have a sense of broad possibilities for the future, but that is part of what you can do in your role, is kind of being the person to create opportunities for them to explore those possibilities, which is really great and is absolutely career exploration in and of itself. And then the last thing I'll mention, which isn't on the slide, but I love talking about it, is risk taking. That is just such a critical developmental task of this age group. We tend to think like 0 to 3 is the most important developmental time, and it is. But there's a lot of kind of parallel processes happening during young adulthood, especially those like later teen years. And one of those is risk taking. So you think about like toddlers, right? And they're kind of looking back at you as they're doing something they know they're not supposed to do. They're pushing boundaries, they're taking risks. They have to touch the hot thing that you told them 50 times not to touch, because they don't know what it feels like unless they actually touch it. And young adults, again, especially those later teen years, really similar. So they have to be able to experience natural consequences. They have to push boundaries. And that's how they kind of figure out the bounds of the world and how they want to move in it. And so as people who support and help them, I'm not saying to say, go try all the things, come report back, let me know how it went. But I'm saying that we can use risk taking as learning opportunities. We can use it to have conversations about how it felt, what felt good about it, what didn't go so well. We can be kind of a soft landing spot when they do mess up or when those consequences aren't so great. But risk taking, very normal, very important part of development at this age.
Can I add one thing? And that is exactly the point you're making right now, is that all of this instability and all of this risk taking, all of this exploring who I am, and my number one thing people have, they just won't make up their mind. Like yesterday they wanted to do this and go out and do this job, and now they want to do this totally different thing, and now they're looking at school programs. And to recognize that is absolutely, and I don't love the word normal, but it is normal. It is developmentally normative. If you look at the bottom of the screen, there is a dark narrative. Many people look at these young people and think, what are they doing? They won't grow up. There's a lot of manuals out there targeting parents to help their youth grow up and be a responsible adult. And what you can do today is to shift that and say, okay, I'm going to recognize there's this negative narrative, and I'm going to see this young person as experiencing a developmental phase where instability is totally normal. Risk-taking is totally normal, and I'm not going to judge it. Back to Laura. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Vanessa. So kind of translating all of that into this career exploration, career pathway, that career development and career exploration is actually a process. I think societally, we kind of expect that people just jump into career planning without anyone supporting this process of exploration and self-awareness. And you think about high school, and by sophomore year, maybe definitely junior year of high school, you're kind of expected to be planning your next steps at that point. And usually those next steps are career oriented, whether it's college, trade school, or just kind of getting a job when you graduate. You're expected to kind of know, and people are asking you, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? And that's really just not how it works. It is not linear. It is not like check this box, check this box, check this box. And I think that that narrative can be kind of harmful. I don't know about y'all. I'm in my mid-30s and I'm still engaging in career exploration all the time. I'm still figuring out what I like and don't like. And so that is kind of one of those things that we all can do as providers who support young people, is facilitating these processes of learning who you are, self-awareness, career exploration, and beyond just what do you want to be? What do you want to do when you grow up? But like actually kind of digging deep into what do you like to do. When I was younger, I wanted to be a teacher, but I am someone, I don't do well with rigid schedules. I am not a morning person. Like people who work with me know, I mean, 9 a.m. even is pushing it a little for me. And if I had become a teacher, I think that I probably wouldn't have done very well, because with teachers, you have to be very organized, right? You need to like be ready to go in the morning. You got to be available when you say you're going to be available. And I think these are some of the pieces that we miss when we're doing career exploration, and we just expect like a job category answer instead of actually like facilitating conversations about what kind of things that young person likes.
Oh my God, beautiful. Building on this, we're going to talk a little bit about positive youth development and also IPS supported employment. Oh, I love there's transitions on the slides. So if you haven't heard about positive youth development, it is characterized by 5 C's. And I want you to take a step back and think about your engagement of young people and families and employers and education systems. And think about like when you're supporting a young person with their career development and you're trying to get them a job, or you're trying to enroll them in school or help them stay in school, or help them keep their job, are you thinking about these things, right? So one of the C's is competence, this idea that it's multifaceted, of course, right? So it has to do with interpersonal and social skills, cognition, and academic performance. And a lot of our services are we're looking at young people and their individual competency, but thinking about also character, connections, confidence, and contribution. And how is our work with young people and families directly impacting these? If you're a fancy researcher on this webinar, these are these mediators, these are those in-between things that lead to your outcome, right? So you want to leverage these and help to engage a young person on, well, why do they want to work, right? So contribution, what is it about getting that job they're going to be able to do for their family? How can I help boost confidence? Confidence is a big part of being successful in the classroom and at work. And how can we focus on building these while we're helping young people explore career options and engage successfully in entry-level employment and also, I'm going to say, post-secondary education? A great example of a positive youth development model that I want to introduce, it's the only evidence-informed model for transition age youth or older youth and young adults, is the TIP model, the Transition to Independence Process model. It's very much focused on empowering young people to discover their strengths, while at the same time, their interests and goals, and also discovering what they don't really like to do, maybe just as important as what you like to do. And also what's really important about TIP as a positive youth development approach is that it isn't just about the young person and working on the young person. Unfortunately, in all of our work, we often get so just siloed at, working with young person and not thinking about all the people that surround them and how to actively engage them in helping a young person explore work, explore school, explore interests that could be related to work and school. So definitely encourage you to check out the TIP model. All right, IPS, Ishan, you're up. Oh, you're muted.
Of course I am. Often used interchangeable with supportive employment. IPS, individual placement support, supportive employment, is an evidence-based practice that has proven to be more successful with helping individuals with disability find competitive employment than any other employment model out there. Initially, it was created for adults with disability, but we found over the years it works with all populations. And I know in Illinois alone, IPS is used with the veterans. It's used with those that are receiving government benefits. It's also used with those with substance use, those with justice involvement. And we have found it to be the most successful model out there. But there are key points to IPS that makes it as successful as it is. And I'm going to talk about those 8 principles. These are the cornerstones of IPS. It is what guides the work that you do every day when you're working with youth employment. Principle number 1, zero exclusion. Zero exclusion is saying that no matter what the barriers are, if the individual is experiencing symptoms at the time, or if they're engaging in risky behavior, if the young person say that they want to work, then they are eligible to receive services. There are no exceptions to this. Anyone who wants to work are eligible to receive those services, so zero exclusion. Principle number 2, rapid job search. Now, oftentimes people get confused with rapid job search. That doesn't mean that you're going to find the young person a job right away. That means that you're going to start the process immediately. So the moment that they tell you they're interested in employment services, you're going to begin that process. And what that looks like is completing assessments, trying to figure out what their preferences are. Maybe you're going to take them out on some tours and to some different work sites, but you're going to start that process immediately. And this is so important because, you know, as older people say, you want to strike the iron while it's hot. You know, if young people are saying that they want to work, you want to capture that moment immediately. And you don't want to put a lot of barriers in place before you start working with the individual. Principle 3, job preferences. This is important because young people want to know that they're being heard, that what is it that they want to do. So it's not just about the job itself. You want to look at, you want to look at how far, it's going to take me to travel to get to work. You want to look at, the uniform requirement. Am I working around a lot of people? Is it a loud environment? You really want to consider all of those preferences. Now, we know with young people, sometimes they have unrealistic expectations. Sometimes they want to do things that we know it may take 8 years of college to even do it. So that's why it's extremely important that you take the time to educate the young people. You want to also take the time to explore. This is what Laura was talking about early, allowing them to explore what's out there, because many of them don't even know. They haven't been exposed to so many different things. So that's where those meeting with employers, that's where you take them to college tours and you take them to different work sites where you complete those interest inventories assessment to find out what is it that they really want to do. Also during this time, you want to tell them, because they're so focused, laser focused on certain things. So for example, I've had a young person that wanted to be a nurse, didn't understand the requirement and what it took, the years of education to become a nurse. But what I did is I sat down with that young person and says, well, there's other things you can do. What is it about nursing that you like so much? Is it because you like helping people? Great. There's other jobs that you can do in the medical field, in the hospital, that don't necessarily require all of the education, but gives you the same satisfaction. And so that's when we start looking at, a CNA, maybe a nurse assistant. So there's some shorter term programs that she can do to still reach her career goal. Never tell the young person they can't do it. You just educate them and then you explore different options with them. Principle 4, benefits counseling. This is one of the most important principles of IPS. The number one reason why individuals with disabilities don't want to work is because they fear losing their benefits. And so not only do you have to educate the young person, but you have to also educate the family, the ones that support them, whether it's the team, it's their guardians or their parents. You want to make sure that they know that you make more money in the long run by receiving benefits and working than just receiving benefits. And besides, there's a lot of incentives out there. Social Security has so many incentives out there because they really want young people to get out there and work and explore and figure out what is it they want to do. And there's some protections. So if they realize that it's not working for them, I can't do 20 hours, they can still go back to receiving benefits. So connecting with a specialist, a benefit specialist from Social Security or maybe your disability office is extremely important because they can sit down with the young people and the family and tell them exactly their options and what they can do when it comes to receiving benefits and working at the same time. Follow along supports. When I speak to employers, when I meet with employers, this is the one thing they have the most challenges with, is because they say they get all these employment programs and they find these great candidates. And then once we hire them, then we don't see them again. That's what makes IPS different. We continue to provide those supports as long as the young person needs those supports long after they receive their jobs. Because young people can get jobs. We do know that. In fact, employers want to hire young people. They love working with young people. It's them keeping the job where they have the most challenges at. And that's when you have to really talk about what are those barriers. You don't want to just, and it's more than just their mental health and housing. You want to think about those age appropriate things. Like, so for example, young people don't know what it means when you get taxes taken out, or why are they taking taxes out? Or do I get paid? I came in the middle of the work week. Am I going to get paid this Friday or next Friday? Or you have some young people, especially those that have been in the foster care system, that, maybe never use a combination lock, or, how far is it going to take me to get to work, and going over those things with the young people. So you want to be very intentional when you're working with the young people, just sitting down with them. What is it going to take to help you keep this job? What can I do to help you keep this job? And if I am not available, and if you can't contact me, who's my support system that I can reach out to help me keep this job? So follow along is extremely, this is an extremely important principle. Principle number 6, integration of IPS into the clinical system. I always tell people employment is everybody's business. Everyone, all the way up into the CEO, executive director, all the way down to the janitorial or residential staff. It's everybody's business. It really does take a village when it comes to helping this population get and keep a job. So that means the employment team is not considered separate, or they're not a specialty team. They are a specialty team, but they're not considered separate. They are embedded with the clinical team. So that means that they're meeting with the therapist, the psychiatrist, they're talking about medication, really trying to figure out trying to remove those barriers, or what is it going to take to help that young person get and keep a job. So for example, if you have a young person that is struggling with social skills, then I should be talking to the therapist. Hey, can you talk to Johnny about this? Or if the medication is preventing the young person from getting up on work on time, then I should be talking to the psychiatrist about this. Or residential staff, you notice that young people are struggling with their hygiene, and you're getting complaints from the employer. Hey, residential staff, can you meet with Johnny and come up with a plan of laundry days? Or maybe they're mixing the dirty clothes with the clean clothes, which is typical, for young adults. They just put everything in one pile and wondering why there's an odor. So those are the conversations you want to make sure you have with the team. Employment is part of the clinical team. It's not separate. It is part of the clinical team, and we should be working collaborative to talk about how to help these young people get and keep a job. Competitive employment. This is one I am the most passionate about. Too often people with disability are subsidized employment, or they're receiving minimum wage. Too often in this country, we have had young people working 20 hours and they're getting, $3 an hour for a piece. Competitive employment is saying that it must be minimum wage, a job that is not set aside for people with disability. And if they're eligible for benefits, then they should receive those benefits. I'm going to say that one more time. It has to be minimum wage, whatever your minimum wage is for your county or city. It cannot be a job just for people with disability, which means that they have to be working side by side with those that do not have a disability. And if they're eligible for benefits, then they're entitled to those benefits. So we are only looking for competitive employment. Now, competitive employment also means seasonal opportunities, internships, temporary jobs. Those are also considered competitive employment. So we want to think about the population, making sure that we're considering those age-appropriate opportunities, summer jobs, working at Six Flags Great America, retail. Those are also considered competitive employment.
Can I add something real quick, Ishan?
Yes, go right ahead.
I'm thinking about this, and I love this too, and the way that Ishan talks about it. And I think this part too is as much, which I think you'll get into with job development, but it's much as much advocacy in the community as it is anything. I think a lot of times we kind of like focus on training, skills building in our young people of how to kind of like function in the workplace, but we also need to advocate in the community and with employers that young people with mental health needs, with mental health conditions can work these jobs and can be sometimes even better employers than someone without, or employees than someone without mental health needs.
So true. Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. Principle 7. This is probably one of the hardest. It really does take a special individual, because that's where sales and marketing comes. You have to be a go-getter, someone with thick skin, and someone who enjoys working with the public to be successful at job development. So job development is more than just finding jobs. Oh, you're, a hiring letter here, an ad here, or sending job leads. It is really intentional. You are creating a relationship or partnership with an employer who have open positions. And so you're trying to figure out, what is it going to take? Because, you have employers who have thousands and thousands of applicants. What is it you need to do to get your application, your young person's application, at the top of the pile and ultimately an interview and hire? And you want to create these relationships because you want to make sure that the young person is successful. This is where you get to talk about job carving, job modification. What are some of those accommodations? Are you flexible in these things? And you can't do that unless you develop a relationship with the employer. And that's what job development is all about. It's really, it's taking those steps you need to take to create that relationship with that employer. And usually we do this in 3 steps. One is really just making that initial contact with the employer. It shouldn't be no more than 2 minutes. We say 3 cups of tea. And this alone is a separate training, but I really want to go over it real quickly because it's so important. That first step is just, making that initial contact, face-to-face contact. You're really just trying to get that meeting with them because, they're not free at that time. You want to make sure you got their full attention. So you set that, that first meeting. The second contact you have with them, you want to just tell them about your program. This is the opportunity you get to learn about them. Many executives and hiring managers love to tell you how they work themselves up in the company. They started as a dish boy, now they own the restaurant. This is where you get to really learn about what are those positions they have a hard time filling. what is the ideal candidate? And you really listening and thinking about your caseload, like who would be a good fit for this? What are some of those things that you just do not hire? You're not going, there's like no exceptions. Whether it's a background check, you don't come right out and ask those questions, but you find a way to get that information from that young person. And then with the third step and any step afterwards, you want to make sure you talk about your program. What is it that you're going to do different than any other employment program or any other partnership that they had before? And this is where you talk about, I'm going to screen all of my candidates. And not only do you have me helping helping the young person, you got the entire team that's helping them and rooting for the young person. And not only am I going to provide those follow-along supports to the individual, but if you have any questions or issues, you can reach out to me. That's what makes IPS separate from any other employment model. And so these are the 8 principles that really every day when I'm providing these services, I'm always thinking about these 8 principles and how can I really carry them out during my day-to-day work with young people. Vanessa and Laura, you guys want to go ahead?
I'm going to add, I want to say something just about the fidelity scale. So we want to share this resource with you. So this is a young adult adaptation of the IPS supported employment model. It also embraces all 8 of these principles, but we do just want to emphasize getting out of the clinic, out of the office. This is community work, and that the gold standard for what Ishan's describing for job development is 6 hiring manager appointments, meetings a week. So I just want you to understand that it isn't just about work, as Laura said, it's not just about like working with the young person and coaching and building motivation and confidence and all that and getting with the family. It's just as important in connecting with employers and building your employer network. And you can do this as a team. This doesn't just have to be the supported employment and education, the C's role doing this on their own. Again, employment and education, career development is everyone's business. The team being cued in to knowing about educational opportunities and also job opportunities in your local community and sharing them in team meetings is really critical. We do want to add just really quickly that there are specific practices that we train and coach on that build on IPS, that use IPS and then really attune it developmentally to older youth and young adults. And one of those really, I'm most interested right now is family engagement and how to do that really well. We're not going to get into that today because we have other future training opportunities coming up. We do want you guys to leave today. I know we've done some kind of overarching principles and philosophical shifts you could adopt, but now we want to talk about some really kind of basic stuff. And Laura, Ishan, I want you guys, we all jump in on these. Laura, I'm going to throw this one over to you to start.
Yeah, so I think that these approaches are really applicable, whatever your role. So, we're talking about supported employment and career development, but even if you're in the role of a therapist, or you're in the role of a team lead, or you're in the role, you work in a school setting, I think all of these hopefully will apply. But at the end of the day, you're going back and thinking about some of those developmental tasks and needs that we talked about at the beginning, and that whole idea of discovery philosophy, and kind of putting it into practice. So one of the things, that we recommend is shorter but more frequent check-ins. So remember what it was like to be a young adult and to have maybe an older adult talking at you for an hour or 2 hours. And at what point did you check out? If you made it 15 minutes, you were probably doing pretty well. So if you can, if your place of employment allows it, try out some shorter and more frequent check-ins. Also communicate how young people want to communicate. We always get some pushback, and we know that some agencies are not comfortable with texting, or that there may be some limitations in terms of the policy around texting. But to the extent that you can communicate via text, do. Even if it's just about scheduling and confirming appointments, do what you can here, because that's just how you're going to reach them. Motivational interviewing. So, there are whole weeks-long trainings on motivational interviewing, which obviously we don't have the time for today. But some of the core principles of motivational interviewing are really, really useful for working with this age group. So this idea of embracing this change process, rolling with resistance, right? We don't just say, okay, you don't want a job. We're not going to, like, come talk to me when you want to get a job, right? Or come talk to me when you know what your goals are. We kind of roll with this resistance that we experience with young people. If you're familiar at all with motivational interviewing, the term OARS will have meaning, but it's essentially 4 strategies that are really useful. So lots of open-ended questions, lots of affirmations, but not too many, because if you use too many, they don't feel real. Lots of reflection, kind of reflecting back and then summarizing. So I would encourage you, if you're not familiar, if you've never gotten training in motivational interviewing, just to do some poking around on the internet. There's tons and tons of resources. I love it. It's great. Also, getting out of the office and doing with. So we talked about like the risk taking that young people, not to infantilize them, but similar to like young kids, right? They actually have to experience the experience to know what it feels like and to know whether or not it's going to work for them. So the extent that you can create opportunities to do things with them, show them first. Ishan and Vanessa taught me do for, do with, cheer on. And I just love that so much. I think it is so appropriate for this age group. So you can do something for them. Maybe you kind of fill out an application for them while they watch along. And then the next one, you do it together collaboratively. And then kind of down the road, they fill it out and you're their cheerleader saying like, you did great. That was excellent. And that's just a really good process, kind of a like, kind of a slow scaling back of that support. I mentioned how a lot of times the transition from child to adult, especially in terms of services, is really abrupt and there's no grace period. And so this kind of do for, do with, cheer on allows us to like slowly transition into independence. Also just getting out and about. I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid. And if you ask kids, what do they want to be when they grow up? They're mostly going to say professions that they've been exposed to. So they're going to say they want to be a doctor, or they want to be a teacher, or they want to be a mommy or a daddy, that kind of stuff. I worked in juvenile justice for a while. I saw some of my juvenile justice folks in the chat here. And a lot of the young people I worked with there wanted to be probation officers. They wanted to be judges. It's all about exposure. And it's not to say that those desires aren't real, but if you can expose them to all the different professions in the world, I mean, it's endless. Getting out there so that they can see that there are more options than just what they know in their kind of limited experience. Being assertive, and I'm kind of skipping around, you guys, some of these kind of speak for themselves, but being assertive. So, early in my career, I heard a lot of don't work harder than the client, and I just don't really like that for this age group. I think sometimes it's appropriate and you have to know when it's time to have that discharge conversation. I'm not saying that you're always quote unquote working harder, but sometimes you do work harder and sometimes it's appropriate to do that, especially during the rapport building phase or after a particularly hard kind of, failure, if you will. Sometimes young people will pull back in terms of their engagement, and it's okay to go to them instead of waiting for them to respond to your voicemail. So we encourage you to be assertive, to get out there, focus on what the young person wants and meet them where they're at.
And if I can add real quickly,
please.
These are, when it comes to being creative and being patient and thinking outside the box, what works for one young person may not work for another young person. So you want to constantly think about what is it that I need to do to engage this young person, to keep this person focused. And sometimes that means doing things completely different, things that, may push the envelope. So for example, when I try to build that rapport with the young person, and I know if they had a struggling childhood, their parents wasn't around, I'll send a happy birthday text message. Merry Christmas. Those little things make a difference. Or they don't want to come in the office and meet with you, then maybe meet them at the park or take them to the ice cream parlor and buy some ice cream. If you had a young person where you struggle to engage with them and they finally meet with you, celebrate that. Hey, let's go get a bite to eat, go get a hot dog. You want to just really think outside the box and be flexible when you're working with this population. It makes a difference in the long run.
Yeah, such a great
Yeah.
point. Don't be afraid to switch it up. And, kind of along that note, one thing I've learned, kind of doing this is that everything you do is career development and career exploration. Like, I think it's easy to kind of get stuck on more of the concrete, like building a resume, filling out applications, asking about jobs and things like that. But, walking around the mall, I think Ishan is somebody who kind of brought this example up one time to me, but walking around the mall and just pointing out like the different kinds of employment and jobs you can have at a mall while you're having a conversation, building a relationship with a young person is career exploration. So really think outside of the box. And I suspect if you're working with young people that you already are a creative and patient and flexible person. So hone those skills and really apply them in this context of work.
I want to emphasize that it's not just you. You're on a team. You're part of a team. You're part of a program. You're part of a community. In really getting people involved to support young people's career development, get consent. It's important. But really think about how you can put career first. Can you imagine if we started our assessments without asking about clinical symptomology and we asked, just who are you? Tell me about yourself. What do you want to be? We don't do that usually. It's not how our systems are set up. But think about how you can do that in the practice, right? I know there's always assessments at the beginning, but there's a lot of work after that you can ask lots of open-ended questions that get young people thinking about like, God, what do I want to be? Also, just really, really thinking about the team working together. I can't stress this enough. It cannot just be the IPS supported employment education specialist or the C's role only focusing on career. Your goal is to bring career into those meetings and help the team continue to think about young people's career development. But the team has to get that this career development is one of the number one things why young people engage in these models, in these services. And so recognizing that as an engagement tactic for therapy and clinical work is really, really important. I want to add here, and I want to invite Ishan and Laura, is just the importance of this tailored, targeted outreach and the capacity to explain. If you're in a C's role right now, or you're a team leader, supervisor, or program manager, you've got to be able to explain the C's role and how critical it is, right? It's not just about therapy. That's not what we do. We're a multidisciplinary team. And so you have to have that elevator speech ready for whoever you're meeting in the community, young people, family. It's easy to develop these and practice them. We will do that in future trainings with you. I want to ask Laura and Ishan, do you want to add anything to this?
I would just add on to what you were saying about kind of selling this and what like that career is actually the thing that engages young people. And I think traditionally mental health services, we say like, let's get your symptoms under control, let's get you on medication, and then we'll kind of look at job opportunities. And the career piece is the carrot that gets young people to want to get their mental health stuff kind of under control, if you will. Like they notice that their mental health symptoms are getting in the way of their success at work, or their success in school, or even their success in their personal relationships. And so it's more of those kind of, again, quote unquote, normal life transitions and happenings and goals that is the context for wanting to work on mental health stuff. So it is kind of the opposite of, I think, what we've been trained to think in the mental health system.
Absolutely.
And finally, this notion of leveraging lived experience. We've all had jobs. We're in jobs. You can validate a young person, their family member, all day long. Use that, do that, partner with the peer support providers. And if you're in Texas, the family partners. Think of creative ways to engage family and how to best support young people. And then I think disclosure, we have a whole training on disclosure and figuring out accommodations, but really thinking about the pros and cons of sharing certain symptoms or diagnosis in certain workplaces or school systems. Really, really important conversations to have beyond this training, but really critical for keeping young people connected, I'm going to say, to positive work and school experiences. Ishan, Laura, do you want to add anything?
I think the peer support is the key. As young and hip as I think that I am, young people are going to respond differently to a peer support staff than they are going to me. They're going to share things that they're not necessarily going to share with me. So I always, take the opportunity to have, especially if I'm struggling to engage that young person, is to bring a peer support staff with me, and it makes a difference.
Totally agree. And if you work in a place that doesn't employ peers, to the extent that you can advocate up your leadership chain to bring that on. But you can also leverage kind of natural supports in that young person's life as peer supports, if they don't exist in your agency. So yeah, this is just invaluable service. And I wanted to say one more thing I forgot when I was talking about approaches, but just quickly throwing it out there. If you've ever or never done a values card sort, that's like one of my favorite tools for kind of values exploration, which leads into great conversations about career exploration. So highly recommend Google values card sort. You can print it off. Yeah, thank you. That was my last point.
I love it. We're almost done. And as a message before we take a couple of questions, is just really, this is really important work you're doing. It's incredible. And it's not just work helping young people. You are public health destigmatizing change agents in your work. You're working with the community, you're working with employers, you're working with school administrators. And it's such incredible work. And I just encourage you to connect to each other. If you sign up for our training that we're going to be hosting a couple of cohorts this spring, you'll get to know other people in similar types of roles within coordinated specialty care teams and how to best, support each other in helping young people with their career development. So thank you, and we appreciate you. All right, questions. Jennifer, do we have any?
We currently do not have any that are in the Q&A pod, but we have a couple minutes. So if folks want to plop some in the Q&A, that would be great. Prior to today's presentation, someone did ask about just, again, motivation and engagement. That was, if you had any last words about that. So they were like, well, how do I get someone motivated and engaged if they're just not quite sure or ready to embark with school or jobs? I know it's a big question, but I promised that I would ask that. So.
Yeah, that's a big question. And we've done whole trainings on that. But I think, I think if I had to give one piece of advice or thought around that, it would be to kind of maybe reframe your definition of engagement and motivation. So maybe the person is not meeting with you, but they're still responding to your text messages. That tells me they're still engaged, right? Or if they're not, if you're getting them job interviews and they're not showing up to the job interview, maybe it's an anxiety thing. Maybe it's not a motivation issue. So just kind of reframing, thinking about what barriers there are, what else can be going on. It's hard though. It's hard.
I think that's a great point. Also, I would add is that the young person is not on the same timeline as you. And I know we're outcome focused and we have numbers we need to meet, but we really have to take the time to really get to know the young person. So when you go meet with them, don't talk about employment. Let them drive the conversation. It'll come out eventually. And the moment they say something that you can use to bring it back towards employment, then do that. So, for example, I spent time learning that a young person loves working on cars. Well, have you ever thought about, working at a shop? But it took me months to get to that point. So just really being patient and know that they're not on the same timeline as you.
Y'all, thank you so much. This has actually been outstanding. And I always love working with you. And what I really want to just convey is, one, thank you for the excellent information. It was spot on, but your genuineness, you are passionate about what you do, and it really conveys with your presentation. So I want to thank you for that. Y'all, folks that are here, we're going to conclude. We do have a survey for you to complete. I've plopped that in the chat, and we'll get that again to you as we continue. But if you could click on that or use that QR code that you see that's currently on your screen. Again, the presentation will be is recorded. We will be uploading that on our website. I will also be emailing you all the slide deck, which is also currently on our website, but just know that these resources are going to be available for you in the future. The last piece that I want to share also is that we do have some upcoming trainings. We are going to be having a super awesome cohort training with Vanessa and Laura coming up, which we're really excited about. And again, I recognize it's 1 o'clock. Vanessa, Laura, Ishan, thank you. You're wonderful people, and we really appreciate having you today. Truly excellent work. And for folks who are able to attend today, thank you for being here. And we will look forward to future engagements together. All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar for today. Thank you so much, you all, for your time.